Hello and welcome back to my Dandelion Diaries. Today we're going to be swatching another series of inks, and these were kindly sent to me by Courtney. So thank you, Courtney, if you're watching this. I am finally getting around to swatching these bad boys, and she was kind enough to send me her collection of the Rohrer and Klingner SketchINKs. She had almost all of them. She's only missing the black one, the 𝗏𝗏, so I will not be swatching the black today, but I'm really excited to see what these look like, honestly, because I've never been able to play with the SketchINKs before, so y'all will get my first impressions with this. As for supplies with all of my other ink videos, I am still in the same 𝗦𝗃𝗵𝗁𝗏𝗏𝗏 notebook with the original Tomoe River paper. Once I finish this, I will move on into the new Sanzen Tomoe River paper because that's the paper I use the most. I have this adorable little ink, ink sample holder by Olive Frog Designs that was sent to me by Priscilla, so thank you so much for that. I will be using my condiment cup today just because we only have 9 samples to get through, and I'm going to be using my glass dip pen instead of my 𝗏𝗏𝗁𝗏𝗏 today. Other than that, just have my normal t-shirt and a jar of water, and we're just going to get started with the first one, which is called, I believe it's Thea, but it could be Thea as well. So initial thoughts on this one, I originally thought it was going to be a brown based on the sample vial and what it looked like in the vial itself, but it's actually a really nice gray. We'll see what it looks like once it's shaded down or dried down all the way on the page, but so far it's a nice medium toned gray. And I really honestly like the color of this. It's very neutral. It's not super warm or super cool, at least in my opinion. It's pretty in the middle. One thing that I researched when I was looking these inks up is that they are completely waterproof. They are good for use in artistic purposes where you can paint over them or draw within them after they've dried down. And they are safe for fountain pens, but like most waterproof inks, you just have to make sure you're cleaning your pen regularly just to help avoid clogs, since they are made with pigment and not the dye like most standard fountain pen inks. The next one is called Lilly. Okay, so first impression of Lilly, I feel like it's gray, kind of. I don't know, because again, like the Thea in the bottle, it looks different than in the swatch. So the little sample vial looks like it's going to be more of like a greenish color, but after swatching it, I guess it's kind of like a greenish gray, but it's a lot darker than I was anticipating. I expected it to be a little bit lighter than it actually is. I don't know, the color of this one's kind of hard to describe. It's warm. It definitely has a warmness to it, maybe even like a cashmere sweatery gray color. This one's gonna be tough. I'm gonna wait to talk about this one a little bit more until it dries down. Next up, this one I believe is called Vroui. It's Vroui. So Vroui or Vroui, not 100% sure on that pronunciation, but this color is hot pink. It is very bright. It is beautiful, honestly, a nice beautiful rosy petally color. I don't even know which direction this ink technically goes, from cool to warm. It feels just really in your face hot pink. I do want to mention that when I was initially pulling from the sample, I noticed a lot of the pigment had sank to the bottom. So I'm going to be shaking the rest of these before I swatch them, just in case. Treat them kind of like a shimmer ink, if you will, just because if the pigment is sitting, I don't want it to affect the way the swatch comes out. Next up, we have Carmen. This is such a beautiful orange. It is definitely on the warmer side. Initially going down, I thought it was going to be a bit dustier, but it's kind of drying a little bit as I'm talking through the initial swatch of this, and it's definitely drying down a little bit warmer than I was anticipating. Kind of like a yellowy orange, but still pretty orange. I'm interested to see if this one has any shading, just because I really love this shade of orange, almost like a flamey orange color. Very fiery, and I do feel like this is a very good name for this ink. I don't know, Carmen, it fits this color, and I don't know, it's really fun. Next up, we have one called Emma. This is a very beautiful green. It's definitely more towards the muddy side. I would say kind of olivey even, not quite brown enough to be olive, at least in the wet swatch. I would say this one might be my favorite so far. I don't know. Lilly is looking really delicious on this page right now in front of me. But Emma is definitely 100% my vibe when it comes to ink colors that I love to write with. It is kind of like an off green color, a muddy green. I'm interested to see how this one looks when it dries all the way down. Next we have Frieda. I would definitely say Frieda is a bluish black color, kind of more towards the dark blue side though, not quite black enough, at least not in the wet swatch. I would say it has kind of a storminess to it as well, almost like it has a little bit more depth in the swatch itself. I really honestly like this color. I don't write with blue black a whole lot, and I honestly don't own a whole lot of blue black ink, at least in my standards. But I really like this one. It's a good shade, and I feel like with the waterproof aspect added to this one, it would be really nice as like an everyday writer for a journal or even for work if you needed to do some important documents. They even talk about using these inks for architecture drawings because they are waterproof, and I think that's a really fantastic idea considering there's so many different colors. Next up we have Marlene. And Marlene is a beautiful bright blue color. Initial swatch with it being still wet, it's kind of like a cornflower blue color or a bachelor blue button flower color. It does have a softness to it. It's not super punchy bright blue, at least not while it's wet. I'll be interested to see again how this one dries down, if it has a brightness to it or if it's going to stay kind of in a more muted tone. Color-wise, it's kind of more towards the cerulean bluish maybe. It's definitely beautiful, a nice solid blue color and a really good one for waterproofness, because I find that a lot of the other waterproof blue inks that I've tried, specifically those by 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏 are not this bright. I feel like the ones by 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏 are a little bit more muted, so I would love to see if this one's a bit brighter. Next up we have Jule or Jule. Now this is a very interesting color. So coming down wet, the swatch looks kind of like an off reddish purple color, but it also looks kind of brown. And I'm really interested to see how this one looks again once it's dry, because I feel like out of all of the inks we've swatched so far, we have a really good blue, really good like warm orangey yellow color. We have a good green in here and a good pink, and the gray is really nice as well. And I'm wondering if this is supposed to be more brown or more red, if we're gonna like complete a color family kind of thing. I don't know on this one. This one's tough, but the shading so far is definitely more of like a warm, like reddish purpley brown color. And the last sample that Courtney sent me is called Klara. And Klara is a beautiful, bright, cool toned green color. Honestly, very emeraldy, very jewel toned. Wow. Honestly, I don't think I've had a green that's cool be this much on the green side. And I feel like most cool toned greens, right, lean more towards like a teal or towards like a more turquoisey type color, even aqua, but like this one definitely fits very firmly in green, but it has a nice blue undertone that makes it a bit cooler. I really like that. Wow, that looks really nice. I'm excited to see if this one dry down all the way too, see if it keeps that brightness, just because I do find that that is a struggle for me with waterproof inks, but I'm really happy with these. Okay, now that I have all of those laid down, I'm gonna go ahead and let them finish drying. I would say most of the ones over here are pretty much done, except for a couple exceptions, but I'll be back in a little bit and we'll do some close-ups and I'll talk a little bit more about the dried color versus the wet color that I've experienced so far. Okay, I am back. I did have to use a piece of blotting paper because this was just not drying down in the pooly spots, so it may look a little funny in some areas, but everything else is dry. I do want to say that these took a lot longer to dry than my normal ink explorations that I do. Usually I come back in like 30-ish minutes, 45 minutes at most, and everything is dried down. It's been an hour, almost an hour and a half. And these are still not completely dried down. So I don't think that's anything to do with the ink themselves. It could just be the amount of ink that I put on the paper itself this time around. Not 100% sure, but we're going to move on from that. I'm going to zoom in and we're going to talk more about how these dried down because they are absolutely gorgeous. So starting off, we had Thea or Thea, however you want to pronounce that. It is a stunning gray color. I actually really like this shade of gray. So there is an ink by D. Atramentis. It's called Silver Gray. That's probably my favorite gray at the moment because it has kind of a light to medium shade going on. This one doesn't really have any shading, I would say. The stars up here that I drew were much less ink than when I first wrote down the name. So maybe as you use it in like a dip pen, it would do that. It would just kind of shade down a little bit lighter. But in a fountain pen, I would think this would do really nice as a nice solid gray color that's really balanced. There's not really any warmness to this or any kind of coolness. It's pretty medium in the center. There's no sheen or anything. It just has a tiny wet spot. Like I said, these did take a lot longer to dry for me this time around. Then we had Lilly, and I have to say I'm in love with this color. I don't really know how else to describe it other than a really nice warm yellow greenish gray color. It's not quite green, it's not quite gray, it's not even really brown. It's definitely in the middle somewhere of all of that. I would love to know if this would shade darker in like it did in the writing here, because when I wrote with it, obviously my dip pen was really full of ink, but in like a fountain pen or even a really fine nibbed pen, I'm wondering if it would kind of turn into this lighter color here, because I really like that shade. Honestly, kind of gives me vibes of like Birmingham Pen Company's Oak Moss. Just the Oak Moss from Birmingham Pen Company is not waterproof like this one would be. Then we had, I believe it's Vroui or Vroui. Again, pronunciation on this one is a little bit of a stump for me, but the color of this is fantastic, bright, punchy pink. I'm actually really glad that it didn't dry down super in your face. So when I've done pink ink explorations before on my channel, usually the pinks are either really vibrant or really washed out. And I feel like this one is kind of in the middle, but maybe leaning a little bit more towards the washed out side. But I do want to say when I swatched this, I did not shake the sample vial, and I did do that with all of the other ones. So it may have been a fail on my part, but the color of this is a nice kind of medium pink, a little bit more towards the red side maybe, but it's not super dark and it's not super light. It's a good medium range of pink. Then we had Carmen. I love this color. I'm a huge fan of like warm yellow oranges or sunny colors or whatever you want to call that. This one definitely gives me nice kind of like sunset orangey vibes over like the ocean, on a beach somewhere. Very tropical orangey yellow color. It's really pretty. And the fact that it is again, waterproof ink, because these are sketch inks, is really cool because you don't really find a lot of colors like this. Even the D. Atramentis document inks that I've tried, like the orange or even the yellow from that line, this is much darker and much more pigmented in terms of like, it's more saturated on the page. I'm not sure level of pigments or anything like that, but they do use pigment in these inks. I do want to say that. Then we had Emma, another one of my favorites from the group, which is no surprise if you've been following my channel. I am a massive fan of green inks. It's probably one of my favorite colors to write with just because it's very earthy and, I don't know, pleasing to look at for me. But Emma is kind of like an olivey green, but maybe more of like a, I don't know, grassy side. It's not quite olive enough. There's not quite enough brown in it to be considered olive for me. It's definitely more on the green side, but it has a bit of a dustiness to it. Kind of like, I don't know, a shady grassy spot on a nice plain somewhere or like in the back of your yard or something. It does have kind of a little bit of shading going on. I don't really know if I could consider that shading just because it is pretty flat all the way across with tone, but it does have some darker areas up here which might be considered shading. I think in the writing the initial dip was darker because it had more ink, and then it got lighter as I used the ink up in the dip pen. But again, I haven't used these in fountain pens, so I can't really say if they really do have a lot of shading or not. Then we had Frieda, and initially I said this was a bluish black color, and I'm not going to stick with that anymore. I'm going to go with more of like a navy dark blue. It does have what looks to be some shading in here. I don't really see this as super dark. It's kind of like a wishy-washy color. I do think it would be really nice, considering it is a waterproof ink, again, for color, that it's a unique dark bluish color. But if I wanted something that was more blue-black, I don't think I would go for this one. But I will say the color of this reminds me a lot of like ocean depths, like really dark ocean-y colors. It's definitely more of a dark blue than blue-black though. I hope that made any sense. Then we had Marlene, which I do have a cousin Marlene, so if you watch this, hi. But this color is nice and bright and blue, almost cerulean even. I don't really know. I wouldn't really consider this really red leaning or really like purple leaning or even more towards yellow or the green. It is pretty blue in the center there for me. This little awkward blip is from when I tried to dry the leftover ink that hadn't dried down yet, so just ignore that space. But there is no sheen to this, which I think is really interesting because a lot of blue inks typically have a bit of a sheen, and considering this is pigment, I figured maybe it would have a little bit, but it doesn't. It doesn't show any sheen for me, at least. I would say the color is a lot lighter than I was expecting, which I like. It's not super bright or dark blue. I think if you mixed Frieda and Marlene together, you might get a really interesting color, but I'm not sure if these are mixable or not, just because you never know with pigment inks. You just never know. Then we had Jule, or Jule. I'm just going to say Jule because that's what I would pronounce it as. And initially I thought this was kind of like a reddish purpley brown color, and I'm sticking with that. It is a reddish purpley brown color. I would say probably more towards the brown side with a red lean to it, maybe a little bit of a purple undertone. The purple's not super strong. It's definitely more of like a reddish brown. I'm honestly not a fan of this one. I think it just reminds me too much of like really bad chocolate. I don't know if I'm alone, but if you've ever gotten chocolate from a friend and you open it up and it's just kind of like that off brown color and you're like, I don't know if I should eat this or not. I'm getting that kind of vibe from this color, which is terrible. Anyways, I think if you like reddish brown colors, it's beautiful. It's a nice like saturated color. It's not a color for me personally. Yeah, and I wouldn't say there's a whole lot of shading going on. There seems to be a little bit going on here. This is where the ink pooled really deeply, but I don't know. I can't get behind this one. I'm sorry. Then we had Klara, which I'm so much, again, I'm a green fan, so I'm going to say this one's really pretty because it's really pretty to me. But the color of this is very unique to me just because of how emeraldy it is. It's definitely more towards a blue-leaning green, but still sits really firmly in the green family. I honestly don't really know if there's another waterproof ink that I've ever come across that is this color, if I'm being completely honest. And I've tried a lot of ink, if again, I'm being honest. But this color is so interesting. It's vibrant green, but with the little blue background, it makes it look truly like an emeraldy color. I really, really like this one. There's no shading. This ink just pulled really weird here too, again, because I think I just put too much on the page, but I really like this color as well. Overall, I want to say thank you again to Courtney for sending me these. I'm really excited to get to play with some of them. And honestly, I think they're all winners, even the Jule, which I'm not even a fan of. I will find a way to use it. And sometimes you just need a good red-brown in your collection, if I'm being honest. I do want to say that these are considered fountain pen friendly, even though they are waterproof and made with pigment. They just have recommendations of making sure your pen gets cleaned regularly so nothing builds up or anything like that, which is pretty standard with any of your other waterproof inks and inks that use pigment. So I just want to put that disclaimer in here. For waterproof inks though, I think this is a beautiful range of colors. You have a really nice pink in here, a really, really nice orange. Honestly, this orange is pretty unique. I love this green. I love this green. I think if you mix these two blues together, you'd find a happy medium. And honestly, Lily is probably the most unique color out of all of these combined. Like, I don't even know how to classify that one because it's kind of like green, kind of gray, but also kind of black and brown maybe. It's just a unique one for sure. Maybe someday I'll get my hands on the last sketch ink in the collection, which is the black, which is the, I believe, Lottie or Lot is how it's pronounced. And I would assume it's just a standard black flat color. I do love that these are waterproof. You could write over them with water or paint over them or use them for, like I said, architectural drawings or whatever you needed to. I think that's fantastic. Anyways, I'm going to leave the video off here. I want to thank you so much for watching, for joining me here today. If you have any requests or recommendations for future ink videos, drop them down in the comments. I'm slowly making my way back into the season 2 of ink explorations, so more videos on that will be coming soon. Anyways, thanks again for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.